So it is 4:02. I'd like to call this meeting of the Stockbridge Planning Board to order. Thank you all for participating. We do have a quorum of the planning board, barely. There are four of us out of the seven. One or two may join later in the meeting. Thank you to those from the public for joining us, and especially to Jeff for joining us again. Again, this is one of those meetings, I guess this is perhaps the third in the last couple of weeks, where we're focusing exclusively on Jeff's draft bylaw and perhaps the implications of that bylaw. We did, I think, pretty much get through it last time. I thought the last meeting with Jeff was especially productive, and I trust that this one will be as well. And we're going to try to stop as close to 6 o'clock as possible so that people can live their normal lives. Christine, do you want to say anything or set out any thoughts before we plunge in?
Yes, I have a few. I apologize. I have been so overwhelmed and so busy. I haven't gotten out all the information as timely as I would like. Jeff prepared answers to a publication that Carol Owens had, not her last one, but the one previous to that. And there was some misinformation about how this bylaw was going to be applied. So I asked Jeff to answer what was said, and he did that. And I thought I had sent it to the planning board when I sent it to Carol Owens last week, and I found that I did not. So you've gotten it now. And these are the facts that you might want to have in your back pocket. So if you're asked questions, you know what the answers are. And I think they should be a part of our record for this evening. The other issue is that we instituted last week, and maybe it wasn't clear, that we would like questions to be asked via the chat function. We just are having problems getting off focus, and we've got to watch Jeff's budget. So if you can please put your questions in the chat function. And if you have questions between meetings, you can email me and I will get answers for you. So I think that's where we're starting. And I think I sent to everybody a couple of times now the rural setting principles that we will be going over this evening.
Okay, good. And the questions, the answers that you referred to that Jeff had for Carol, you've just sent those out?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just looking in my email.
You don't need them for this meeting. It's just so you have the background information.
Oh, okay, good. Fine. Well then, rural siting, is that where we want to start? Is that what you're saying, Christine?
I'll turn the meeting over to Jeff. I think he knows where we need the help better than I do. So let's turn it over to him.
Okay, Jeff.
Okay, well, thank you. First off, I just wanted to go over some to-do items from the last meeting. I had a half a dozen things I had agreed to do, and I think I've done them all. So let's see. One was to send out the rural siting principles, and that's been done. Another was to send out the worksheet, the 37 Interlaken Road worksheet that shows
Yes.
all that information according to the NRPZ bylaw that I've drafted for you. Let's see. I also was going to look at your subdivision regulations for anything unusual. I looked at them. I don't really see any unusual requirements. There is a 500-foot limit on dead-end streets. That can be somewhat limiting on development projects unless you waive it, which you have the ability to do. It does appear that there's a subdivision just to the north of the DeSisto property that probably got a waiver to that, because that's Meadow Lane. That's a great big long subdivision road that's much longer than 500 feet. So if that was done by subdivision, apparently you're willing to waive that. But anyway, that's the only thing I really saw in there that was unusual requirement. That was just to kind of inform me about doing the conventional build-out assessment on that same property, which I did do. There was a question about whether the inclusionary housing density bonus for providing housing could be done with money rather than actually building houses on the site. That was asked. And yes, I believe you can do that. And I think probably the best way to do it, if you wished, would be to have it as a applicant option, rather than you deciding whether it's going to be houses built on the property or money in the bank. It's probably better to leave it as a developer option. Because if you suddenly decided you want money, then that kind of looks like an impact fee, and that gets a little dicey. So the answer is yes, you could do that, but my recommendation is to have it be an option. Let's see, I was going to call Joel Russell, and I did do that. Spoke to him about overall approaches. He's no longer working for you, but he's a friend of mine, so he's willing to talk to me, which I'm glad of. So we kind of worked over a little bit of a scheme of how to link up the NRPZ bylaw along with a separate cottage era estate adaptive reuse bylaw, and I can talk about that later. It's kind of have an outline of that, how that might work. Also, let's see, two other things. I did agree to do a conventional build out of 37 Interlaken. I did the NRPZ build out last time, and we went through that, through the open space and the 38 units of housing. I think it was 244 acres of open space, 76 acres of developable land, and 38 units of housing is what we came up with. So just simply using the same assumptions that went into figuring out the net area to use that I did previously, I ran the calculations through based on your R2 and your R4 zoning and what a residential subdivision might yield in there. And I came up with 54 lots. Now this is I know, Christine, I think I told you yesterday it was 37. I decided to calculate them just exactly the same way using the same assumptions. So I got 54. So that would be more conventionally. So 38 by NRPZ, 54 conventionally. That's in theory. So, and that's usually the way it is with NRPZ. You get less units, and part of that is because you get some more benefits in other areas that developers like. So it goes from 54 to 38, and of course the 54 lots would be scattered all over that property, the front, the middle, the back, up the hills. Some of those lots will have wetlands on them. Some of those lots will have steep slopes on them, but it'll pretty much cover the entire property, and there won't be any 244 acres of open space left over. It'll just be a spread of 54 lots. So I did that as a basis of comparison. And then the last thing I did was I was trying feebly last time to explain the transfer of development right options. And I said that I would do a little graphic on that. And I did do a little graphic. It's very primitive, but I think it gets the job done. So perhaps if I could have sharing options, I'll bring that graphic up and let you take a look at that.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Getting better at this. Okay, can you see this?
Yes, very elegant.
Yeah. It's what a planner does for graphics. My phone's ringing. Hold on. Was it a fake? One of those fake calls. Okay. So this is how TDR might work. Again, TDR is an option that you could put in there or not. And it's something that a developer of a NRPZ could seek through a special permit. And the way it works is down here you have your project, your NRPZ project. You know, imagine it's on the DeSisto property or something. And, you know, most of the land is preserved. In DeSisto, it would be 76% preserved. And then a smaller area is developed. And the way the transfer of development rights works is the applicant for this can go out and find land that either they own or someone else owns who's willing to do this with them, and they can transfer in development rights to increase the number of units in the NRPZ by preserving either 15 acres or 25 acres for one added unit. So it's not a bargain bonanza. You're setting aside 15 acres here and only getting one more unit down here, or in this case 25 and only one more unit. So this can work for some developers who have access to land, or for other landowners who want to cash in a little bit and don't mind preserving their land. You know, I haven't seen anybody do this yet, but it's a fairly simple process. And the difference between the 15 and the 25 is the 15 acres requires the full analysis of removing all the constrained land and the slopes and the wetlands and the water bodies and mapping all that stuff and then taking it out of the area of that whole parcel up here, then dividing by 15 to see what you've got to transfer. That can be an expensive process to do all that mapping and survey work. So the idea for the 25 acres is if you don't want to do any of that work, you can just preserve 25 acres and don't bother to map it. You know, it'll just be 25 acres. It has to have some conservation value, but you don't have to locate every wetland and every slope. And you'll get one added unit for that. So you can go through the process here, the laborious, costly process, and get 1 unit per 15, or you can skip all the mapping and get 1 unit per 25 over here. So that's how that works. And there's a cap on how much can be brought in here, a cap of 25%. So density bonuses and or TDR combined can't increase the development in this portion by more than 25%. So that's how it works. Any questions on that? So just so that
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry, I did have a question. I was muted. So what's the benefit to the person who owns the 25 acres?
the developer of the project pays them
Oh,
something for this. Um, they get to keep this, but they just preserve it with a conservation restriction, and the developer gets one added unit.
so it's between the developer and the owner of the land, how much they'll get paid for that, doing
Yes,
that?
yes.
Oh,
And,
okay.
if it's the same individual, then there's no, there's no money exchange. It's just you preserve this and you get an extra one down here. But if it's separate ownership, then they have to work out some kind of financial deal that works for both parties.
Jeff, if you can look in the chat thing on the bottom of your screen, there are a couple of questions relating to this topic.
Okay, let me see if I can get to the chat without.
I don't think you need to keep the screen sharing. I think that's
Okay.
pretty straightforward.
We're stopping. Chat.
The first one is, if you haven't seen TDR in action, do we need to incorporate it into our bylaw?
Well, just because I haven't seen it done yet doesn't mean it couldn't be beneficial.
And Jeff, isn't in your language, it's very clear that the planning board would have some authority to determine whether or not we wanted this to happen, correct? I mean, for the quality of the
Correct.
parcel that is being transferred. So there are some controls. It's not just that a developer could come in and say, here, it's 100 acres. I want to build 4 more units, and the land is really questionable. We would be in a position to say, let's look at this, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. There is some criteria that you can use, and it is a special permit. So no one's going to get it unless there's a public benefit to doing it, because you wouldn't give the special permit otherwise.
And then the other question is, if you trade a unit for 25 acres and the 25 acres can include already restricted land, does that mean 25 acres could constitute already restricted land such as wetland?
I would have to look, but I don't believe that can count already restricted land. But I will check. Yeah, you can't double dip. You can't preserve what's already preserved.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. I'll make a note to check that, but I'm pretty sure we anticipated that thing, that eventuality.
I think so, but I can't find it.
Okay. Let me just write this down. Okay, very good. Yeah, there wouldn't be any point in doing that, because if it's already preserved, then you don't want to award development rights because it doesn't have any development rights. Yep. Okay, so let's see. I think those are all my assignments from last time.
Okay.
And we can talk about anything else. At some point, I'd like to go over a kind of an overall framework for how this bylaw, the NRPZ bylaw, would interact with a cottage era estate adaptive reuse bylaw that you may also have me draft as a separate bylaw, how those two could work together.
And let me stop you right there, Jeff. Are we agreed that it should be, in fact, a separate bylaw? Or is there a way to incorporate it in the NRPZ bylaw? And does that second option just complicate things unnecessarily? Is it better to have a separate bylaw in your view?
I was thinking that at first of dividing them up so we don't have such a long bylaw. But what Joel and I have discussed is that the conservation era estate, cottage era estate bylaw, if it was utilized, could only be utilized in conjunction with the NRPZ bylaw.
Right, right.
So I can just as easily stick it at the end of this bylaw. If they're going to be linked anyway, I can't see a problem with just making them one big bylaw. It makes it a long slog for anyone who wants to try to get through it. You're probably talking 15 to 18 pages altogether.
Yeah, that is a long one. How does everybody else feel, particularly on the planning board? Is there a strong preference for one approach versus the other? I do think that one way to maybe cut down on the length of a cottage era estate bylaw revision would be to incorporate, if it were a separate bylaw, to incorporate by reference elements of the NRPZ bylaw, so that we're not, regurgitating great quantities of material that we can simply refer back to. I don't know, that sounds like
So
it should
why
be.
don't you listen to what Jeff's proposal is? Because I think you're trying to make a decision without knowing how he sees these two bylaws relating to each other. And I think it will be a lot easier once you understand what he's saying to think about what the options are.
That's fine. Do you want to dive into that now, Jeff?
Sure. Okay. This is something that Christine and I have gone over a little bit, and then I called Joel yesterday and ran it by him because I know he was dealing with both of these things, and had two separate bylaws that at least that I've seen, one dealing with the open space and one dealing with the cottage era. In the end, Joel and I agreed that we're kind of thinking along the same lines here. So the outline briefly would be to have an NRPZ bylaw that would be widely applicable to parcels, say greater than 10 acres or whatever you pick in Stockbridge. And it would be the zoning for a subdivision. If anyone was going to subdivide land, not roadside lots, subdivision, they would have to follow this zoning. And that would be just like so many other towns have done with NRPZ. That's the way they adopt it. So you would adopt it like most of the other towns I've worked with. And then, because you have these unique properties and you're wanting to resolve how they might be adaptively reused rather than just continue to decline, you have a cottage era estate adaptive reuse bylaw, and either that's a separate standing bylaw with its own section in your zoning, or it goes on to the NRPZ. You can do it either way. And the cottage era estate bylaw would be selectively applicable. It would not be as applicable as NRPZ. So there's a couple ways of doing it. One, I think before you had attempted to make a list of properties that would be eligible using some criteria. You know, they'd have to have a cottage or estate or something like it. So that's one way. You have a list, and here are your 20 or 30 or 40 properties maybe that might be applicable or less. Another way to do it, and this way you don't have to come up with a list in advance, would be to have some criteria as to what a cottage era estate is. What are the hallmarks of it? What are you looking for? And then anyone who believes they have a cottage era estate, like the DeSisto property, would go to the historic commission in your town and would seek a recommendation from that commission. And that recommendation would be an entryway into the door to use that bylaw. So you need to, there's no list of properties, but you have one and you believe it merits development under this bylaw. So you go to the historic commission and you get them to write a letter of referral or recommendation, which goes to the planning board. So first stop historic commission, second stop planning board. And what you'd be seeking is a special permit from the planning board to redevelop according to the CEE, I'm calling it, bylaw. And the planning board would first have to concur with the historic commission that this was indeed a cottage era estate property that can be developed under this bylaw. And once they've done that, when they probably would concur, then the project is subject to two sets of standards. The first would be the cottage era estate standards, and in there it would describe the kinds of uses and things, and the permitting process and the meetings required, and if there's going to be any public meetings other than the mandatory public hearing, if there's going to be meetings like Joel laid out, informal information meetings and concept plans and all that, that would be spelled out in there, what you have to do. But what you'd also have to do is protect open space as a part of this. And for that, you would come under the NRPZ bylaw. So the cottage era estate and the development of that would come under the CEE bylaw, and the preservation of the open space and the conservation analysis and findings process and the requirements for open space and the way to do the calculations would all come under the NRPZ bylaw. So you'd combine them. And if you did that, then say in the Sisto case, what I'm thinking about now is how do you calculate density? How do you calculate how many units of whatever it is going to be in there? In the NRPZ bylaw, what you're calculating is dwelling units. How many single-family dwelling units? And it was 38 in my calculations for the Sisto. But if the Sisto was going to come in under the CEE bylaw and want to redevelop that estate and do other things other than just single-family dwellings, things like a hotel or a restaurant or condominiums or townhouses or things like that, maybe even some single-family dwellings, how would you figure out what that, how much to allow? So thinking maybe we could think about taking that 38, which would be 38 single-family dwellings, and having a conversion table. So 38 single-family dwellings could also convert to X number of hotel rooms, X amount of townhouses, X amount of whatever type of housing is going to go in there. So that's one way to do that, to link those two, to take the NRPZ 38 units and transfer it over to the kinds of units that would be proposed in a CEE proposal. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And like I say, I can put the CEE stuff right at the end of the NRPZ, have it be its own section, and draft it up that way. Probably going to end up with 15 to 18 pages altogether, depending.
Jeff, as I understood what you described, this approach to the Historic Preservation Committee first by a developer, it puts the not the onus, it's the developer's option to do that, right? We can't, as a planning board, require that, if I understood you correctly. So what would keep a developer of, say, the DeSisto School from avoiding going to the historic preservation? I mean, we're
Well,
not forcing that methodology on any developer, right? Is that a correct
well,
understanding?
the development under the CEE bylaw is at the developer's option. So I have this chunk of land. Say it's the DeSisto property, and
Right.
it's got a cottage era estate on it, with
Right.
infrastructure and roads and gardens and all that. They could take that property and just develop it as a residential subdivision under the NRPZ bylaw and get 38 units and do it that way. Knock those buildings down, or just, keep one of those buildings and turn it into a single family dwelling and sell it along with the others. They could do that. Or because they would likely be eligible as a cottage era estate, they could go and visit with the Historic Commission and seek their approval to proceed under that bylaw. That would be their option.
Right.
And that's a step that they'd have to take before they could, or they'd have to include that in their application to you. You'd be looking for that recommendation. And I'm going to have to check with one of my lawyer friends, but I think you can do that. I think that's possible. So then you're not really in the position to decide on what's of historic significance or not. It's already sort of been to the town experts, and they've looked at it. I mean, you do have final say on eligibility, the way I'm thinking about it. So if perhaps it's a real sham, and there's nothing more than an old barn on the property, and they're trying to say it's once was associated with a cottage era estate, and therefore we want in. You may not agree with that, so you still have the final say on eligibility.
Okay. Any other questions on this topic?
Jeff, as I was thinking about this, I'm wondering if, and it gets more complicated, but is it possible that in certain instances we could give bonus units for maintaining a historic building? Because I think if we believe they're historic, they add to the town character, and it costs more to redevelop than it does to bring in a bulldozer and knock them down. So I think that, I've been thinking about this anyway, I have no idea if it makes sense, that we could perhaps give a small number of bonuses if people keep their historic buildings or buildings of interest, but I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, with the CEE, you're also going to get the ability to propose things like restaurants, hotel use, spa, what did I say, health club, a wedding and catering facility. I'm not sure of all the things that go into these places, but you're also getting a smorgasbord of different uses available to you, and you can still get those. The 38 would just would just translate to units. And they would, instead of 38 single-family dwellings, say with 4 bedrooms apiece, you could do 38 times 4 bedrooms is 100 and some odd bedrooms. And you could say you could reallocate those bedrooms in this facility as, a hotel room, 1 bedroom, on a schedule. So those single-family dwellings could be converted to types of residential units that would be desirable in one of these things. So it can be set up to be attractive. It just depends on how you convert the 38 units of subdivision to 38 units in a CEE type project. If you're worried it's not generous enough, you can just make the conversion schedule more generous right up front.
We also have a question. My concern at 10 acres is you will permit non-residential uses all over town. It effectively makes every neighborhood subject to hotels and restaurants, etc. How do you respond to that?
Well, what are the size of these properties that have these places?
There are a number of larger lots. I don't know that we have made a determination. I think Joel's bylaw was 60 acres you had to have for something that was cottage era. I can't remember the other dimensional requirements, but what you're saying is we could perhaps make a determination that there needed to be a minimum acreage for this provision to take effect. What I'm hearing you say, is that true?
Yeah, if you were worried about too much development on too little land, you could set it at 20 or 30.
And if you only had 10 acres, you really wouldn't get those many units anyway under this formula. So I don't think it would overwhelm
Right.
a neighbor. Okay, thank you.
You all think that 20 or 30 acres is a reasonable threshold if they're going to use the cottage era aspect?
Yeah, my sense would be the larger the better.
Okay.
And it has to have a historic something on it, correct? I
Right.
mean, it's gotta have something you're gonna develop into this, right? That's
Right.
historic.
Right. So you need to go to the planning board with a
Or the his-
parcel or a project area of at least say 30 acres and a recommendation of the historic commission that it merits redevelopment under this bylaw. So they have the land and they obviously have some type of estate, and the historic commission has blessed it.
Sounds
You know,
good.
in principle, for other reasons, including just public perception, the involvement of another town body in this process strikes me as it could be a complication, but it could also be a benefit that the planning board is not the sole, even though we have the final say. We are going to, under this approach that you've described, Jeff, we're going to have to listen to the Historic Preservation Committee, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, it seems to me.
Yeah, and that kind of draws in the select board because they appoint the historic commission.
Yeah,
And
there's that too. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, okay.
Another question is, how are you going to determine how many and what types of commercial uses are going to be permitted under the CEEB?
We need to go down through the likely uses of these places, and you probably know what many of them are. You've, I imagine, experienced them in the DeSisto proposal. They're probably listed in the brochure I have here. And then just have to think of what's the range of uses that would make a facility like that economically successful. What would be the demand? Would a health spa be something that would work in these places? Would a tavern, fitness center, swimming pools, recreational facilities. Why would one of these things be attractive? The main house is one thing, that's sort of the centerpiece, but then people need things to do there, places to spend their money. So yeah, and I think I've seen lists of those types of things in Joel's draft, and I believe it's been somewhat enumerated, but.
Related to that, there's a question of, am I understanding this? The bylaw will open any 30-acre parcel with a structure deemed historic to commercial development as a spa, resort, etc. Is that correct?
If 30 acres is the threshold you select, the structure would have to be deemed not just a historic, but historic in the sense that it's a cottage era estate. You probably have hundreds and hundreds of historic buildings and barns and sheds and everything else in Stockbridge, but you're narrowly focusing on this type of property. So if the historic commission determined that yes, indeed, it meets the intent of the bylaw and it is a cottage era estate, then yeah, it could come in and apply for one of these special permits to add spa, resort, restaurant, hotel, that type of thing. How many of these types of uses you think are appropriate, and they'd all have to be things that would be reasonably compatible with residential uses that are probably nearby. Probably wouldn't want to have shoot clay pigeons out there, or run dirt bikes, or I'm not sure the rich and famous are going to want to get on a dirt bike and ride around, but there are things that you wouldn't want to have there because they'd be disruptive, and it's basically quiet and quiet recreation.
The question is, what definition are you using for CEE cottage era estates? I assume using the definition that is in our existing bylaw. Is that true, or have you changed it?
Well, I think we're all going to have to review what the definition is in your existing bylaw, what the definition is that Joel put together, and develop something. I never heard of a cottage era estate before I started working with you folks, so I don't know anything about them, but I think you do, and I'm going to lean on you to help describe what it is we're talking about. Perhaps your historic commission folks have some insights.
We can ask them. Another question is, current R2 and R4 zoning does not allow for commercial development, stores, restaurants, etc. in the residential areas of Stockbridge. The revised CEB bylaw under discussion violates those principles of residential character in outlying neighborhoods. Why? For what purpose?
I think the underlying purpose, and this is not my purpose, but this would be your purpose, why you're doing this, is to protect and preserve and restore and adaptively reuse those buildings in those estates so they didn't crumble and have to be demolished, to preserve your history. And in order to do that, to allow the properties to be redeveloped in an economically viable manner. So you'd be trading the preservation of the estates for some uses that otherwise wouldn't be allowed in these estates. And also in conjunction with doing the project, you'd preserve a lot of open space that's on that same property. So that other open space, maybe not right next to the building or the grounds, would not be converted to residential subdivision or other uses in the future. So you'd preserve the estate, preserve a piece of your history, and also preserve a good chunk of existing open space on the same piece of land. And you'd have to make the decision that that's a fair trade-off for some of those uses that wouldn't otherwise be allowed.
Another question is, a problem with the previous CEE bylaw was that bylaw was amended each time one of the properties wanted to do something. It was originally passed as spot zoning for Elm Court and then amended to try to have it apply to DeSisto. I think that's a comment. I don't think that's a question. So it's just the CEE was amended each time it was used.
Yeah.
Vision that we have on the zoning bylaw, that is in our zoning bylaw.
Yeah, I looked at it, and the things I noted about it, what was the Board of Selectmen as the special permit granting authority, which is a bit unusual since they're not really a land use permitting board. The only types of units allowed are single family dwellings, it appears. There's a part of it here that 6.6.3D is very confusing. I forget what that dealt with. Lots of picky details in there. When I say picky details, it means that the bylaw writers have tried to figure out too much in advance and make guesses about what certain things should be allowed, not allowed, limited, how many, different sizes. And if you're operating under a special permit, you can have more latitude in that, because you never know what these proposals are going to commit at, what might be appropriate or acceptable. So I think sometimes if you get too far into the weeds with these bylaws, then that's the problem. You have to keep going back and adjusting them for each individual proposal. So I'm hoping to write one that has enough flex to it, so you can find ways to approve good proposals that you deem are in the interest of Stockbridge, and yet enough strictness to turn down the bad ones. It's also 80 acres. You have to have 80 acres to do it. I don't know if that leaves some pieces out. And then I didn't see any involvement by the Historic Commission. So there are some problems with that one. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is write one that has enough elasticity so that you don't have to run back to town meeting every time you get a proposal.
I think those are all the questions we have right now in chat. I don't know if there are others on this. I know it's a complicated concept, and we'll probably have to come back and visit it a few more times before people are comfortable with where we go with this. But
Mhm.
at least, we have something now to look at and think about, and I think that's important.
Yeah. I'll just tell you, I think everyone in Stockbridge has seen the plans for the DeSisto piece of land there, the cottage area adaptive reuse of that. And my impression of it was, well, first of all, I don't think any open space was preserved in there. But I kind of liked what they proposed up front. They kept away from the road. I guess there's a big green up in the front that maybe used to be a polo field or is big enough to be a polo field, with a kind of a sweeping entry from both sides. And I kind of like what's proposed for the main structure and right behind it, the way it's oriented inwards to gardens and pools and other things, and the parking is kind of relegated to the outside, so you're not, when you're in there, you're not in a sea of cars. I thought that was fairly tasteful and reasonable. But when they punched out across the wetlands in the rear and started spreading out single-family dwellings all over the place, that's where I think that proposal kind of went off the rails. So it basically involves developing all the easy to develop land on that piece of on that property, and then just forgetting about the hillside in the back. But so we might take a few lessons from that. I don't know if you've heard objections to that aspect of that project, or what, but that kind of strikes me as a little over the top, that particular proposal.
I believe when they went to the planning board hearing, and Marie was on the planning board then, there were a number of people who came out to the hearing. It was huge, and a huge number of people, and there were people pretty much opposed to it, with some people being positive. And I'll see if I can find better records so you can see what was said that night at the hearing, because it was a while ago, and I'm lucky if I can remember a day ago at this point. So I don't know, Marie, do you have an impression from sitting on the board when you were hearing it?
I think the size of it was what a lot of people objected to. I think there were people in town that felt that it was okay to develop, to make a restaurant out of the main building. And they didn't particularly, one of the big complaints was that they didn't like the timeshare part of it, with people coming and going. Some of us didn't like you, the single family development down in the back. And I think the size of what it was going to be was a major objection. But there were people in town that felt something should be developed there. They were mostly people who felt it was a good tax base, but that it was just too big a project. And we never really got much of a chance to, because the selectmen were in charge, we never really got much of a chance to talk about it or change it or talk with these people.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a big objection to the size, for sure. I think. I mean, I don't know. Others were, I don't know. Bill, were you around then?
I wasn't on the planning board, but
Right.
That's generally my impression was that,
We didn't have much to do with it because it was the selectmen. and
right,
We were just, and then, excuse me, what they did was try to change the bylaw. And then it kind of became ours. And people really didn't want them changing our bylaw. And that was a big objection. It was, there were a variety of reasons to object, but there were people that felt that something should be able to happen there. You know, quite a few people in town felt that there should have been something allowed. Maybe not that big, but we didn't really have good, you know, like a bylaw like you're putting together of what you could do and what you couldn't do. If some of it was going to be used for commercial stuff. You know, we had our subdivision bylaws, but
the other
Yeah,
big
I-
property,
you know,
the other big property that was recently, a topic for community discussion a few years earlier than DeSisto was Elm Court, which did get a permit to develop. This is Jeff, a large estate, mostly in Stockbridge, partly in Lenox, very minimally in Lenox, that had at one point was the largest wood shingled house in America, I think, something like that. It had 70 bedrooms, a third of which were for staff. Anyway, the owner was going to redevelop that into a hotel and add some additional units, I think, on the grounds.
Uh-huh.
And then he couldn't get financing, so that project's gone
He was
dormant.
held up in court because the Lennox people objected. So it was held up in court for 2 years, and then the finance, you know, times changed, financing ran out.
Yeah,
But it wasn't that, you know, it was a court battle.
Wasn't it that Lennox approved it?
Yeah, it was Lennox.
Lennox approved it, but then some neighborhood residents didn't like it.
Right. Neighborhood residents held it up in court, and
Yeah.
they lost their funding.
So I'm looking at the DeSisto proposal here, this being the front.
Yep.
This being the area right behind the main building. And then you cross the wetlands and you go over here and
That's what we didn't like.
yeah, and you have 34 single-family dwellings over here, plus some recreational facilities. So 34 would be almost the 38 that I calculated you would get to work with. So this project, I believe, would as it's proposed here, would go significantly beyond where I'm at right now with this.
I think that's what people thought. It was just too big.
And Elm Court is now on the market, but the special permits were just renewed recently. So it would sell with the special permits, as I understand it, if somebody buys it and wants to do that kind of development with it. I also think the DeSisto School, they were coming in for site plan review, and that's why it didn't work within the structure that we have. And doing it by site plan review really did take a lot of control away from the town's planning board or board of selectmen. But maybe there's somebody on the line who has, or on the meeting that has something that they feel is better information, because it has been a while.
So anyway, it probably would be a good idea, since it has to come through the NRPZ process, and you're already calculating density in the NRPZ process, that you just stick with that methodology of calculating density, and then and then develop a conversion table from single family dwellings to something else, would be much more compact type units, hotel or condominium or townhouse or whatever they're going to build. And something that's something that would be sufficient enough to make a place like that go.
Jeff, do you have examples of this approach using, as you put it, conversion calculations?
Joel's got some in what he wrote, which I can start with and take a look at.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, what I could do, if people feel that the front part of DeSisto is reasonable, I could take, I think in this brochure, or I can find out how many total units of hotel and condo and townhouse, whatever they have there, and develop something that would take 38 and convert it to that. So then you'd be, you could go back and say, well, under the new bylaw that we're writing, the DeSisto proposal would, the front part of it would be okay. They could do all those things up front. They'd have enough density for that. But that back part wouldn't fly. If that's what you want.
I think that would be helpful, so people could see what you mean here and really kind of compare like your other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the horse is out of the barn here, but somebody in this meeting wrote me through the chat function, be careful referring to a specific property. Give a hypothetical example that matches characteristics rather than naming a specific property to avoid the appearance of discrimination or favoritism. Unfortunately, we have been talking about that property for some time now. It was the hot button issue, as was described a few years ago, that frankly set us on this quest to revise our bylaws. So I think it's a little difficult to try to pretend that we're not talking about that property. I'm being
Mhm.
honest here. I appreciate the advice from this person,
Yeah.
but I also see, kind of see her point.
Yeah. In every town I've worked in, I think, I've been given one or more properties to do models on, to run the numbers, to evaluate. Usually properties that people are familiar with, some big open field or area on the corner where everybody knows where it is, and it's something like that. And this one seems to to jump out because so many people are familiar with it.
Yeah.
But it's not uncommon at all for me to take actual properties and do these hypotheticals on them.
Okay, I just passed that on as
Okay.
as a thought. Jeff, what else would you like to cover this afternoon?
Well, let's see.
Do you want to go through the rural siting principles and how that
Sure.
applies?
Sure. Can somebody else share them? I don't have them in a shareable form. Is anybody?
I printed mine out and I'm not sure I can find where they are.
Okay, they are in an email that I just pasted them into an email.
Yeah,
Christine, do you have that email? I think it was to you.
I sent it out to the board a couple of times, but I don't have the ability to do screen share, I don't think. I'm trying to figure this out. I've never been challenged to do that, so I've always let Kate do it. Maybe we can just talk about them as I try to figure out where they are.
Okay.
I can open the file, but I don't know how to then screen share it.
Christine, share screen is the little green
Okay, I
on
have.
the middle of your,
Did I just, yeah, and did I just share the agenda?
yes, you did.
That was unintentional.
Oh, okay, I think I'm
Kind of
able
the
to,
email Christine was referring to.
yeah, I think I'm able to share the rural siting principles.
It says I cannot start because other people are sharing. So
Okay. Christine, do you want to, you're trying to share them? I think I can too.
if you can, I'm fine with that.
Okay, well, let me try. Yeah. Okay. Here they are. Can
Yay.
everybody see them?
They're small.
Yeah. Well, I can read them.
I can read them.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, these were put in, these were written by Joel Russell, and they were put in our Shutesbury bylaw a long time ago. 2008, we passed all this stuff. You know, for use in different applications. When certain types of permitting was being evaluated, you could go to the rural siting principles and say, well, you know, we don't like what you've done here because this violates this rural siting principle. So at least you have it in black and white what you want. So let me just read them. It's more fun to do them together. The following standards for land development shall apply to the siting of all uses and structures that are in open space designs. That's NRPZs. And we called it open space design, but it's an NRPZ for you, or subject to site plan or special permit approval. They are recommended but not required for the siting of individual residences on existing lots where no site plan or special permit review is required. Whenever feasible, retain and reuse existing old farm woods roads and lanes rather than constructing new roads or driveways. This minimizes clearing and disruption of the landscape and takes advantage of the attractive ways that old lanes are often lined with trees and stone walls. This is not appropriate where reuse of a road would require widening in a manner that destroys trees or stone walls, or where an existing road is aligned in a way that disrupts drainage or accelerates erosion. Preserve stone walls and hedgerows. These traditional landscape features define outdoor areas in a natural way and create corridors useful for wildlife. Using these features as property lines is often appropriate, as long as setback requirements do not result in constructing buildings in the middle of fields. Avoid placing buildings in the middle of open fields. Place them either at the edges of fields or in wooded areas. Septic systems and leach fields may be located in fields, however. Use existing vegetation and topography to buffer and screen new buildings if possible, unless they are designed and located close to the road in a manner historically found in town. If vegetative buffers are used, a minimum depth of 50 feet of mixed ground cover shrubs and trees should be provided. Group buildings in clusters and tuck them behind tree lines or knolls rather than spreading them out across the landscape in a sprawl pattern. Minimize clearing of vegetation at the edge of the road, clearing only as much as necessary to create a driveway entrance with adequate sight distance. Use curves in the driveway to increase the screening of buildings. Site buildings so that they do not protrude above treetops or crest lines of hills as seen from public places and roads. Use vegetation as a backdrop to reduce the prominence of the structure. Wherever possible, open up views by selective cutting of small trees and pruning lower branches of large trees rather than by clearing large areas or removing mature trees. Minimize crossing of steep slopes with roads and driveways. When building on slopes, take advantage of the topography by building multi-level structures with entrances on more than one level, e.g. walkout basements, garages under buildings, rather than grading the entire site flat. Use the flattest portions of the site for subsurface sewage disposal system and parking areas. Where feasible, site buildings and other areas to be developed in a manner that does not block trails or paths that have traditionally provided access to backland. This provision shall not be construed to create any public access rights that do not otherwise exist. So, you know, these are just things that you can go to when you're reviewing an NRPZ for sure. You know, they could also be made to apply to a cottage era estate. We use them occasionally as necessary in special permit and site plan review. You know, we can always go to these and cite non-compliance with the rural siting principles and lean on them to change their plans. Because having it in writing like this and them not complying with it is a justification for denial that'll hold up. So we use them in a number of different ways. So I'm going to stop sharing this unless, there we go.
So Jeff, these principles could be incorporated into our zoning bylaws.
Yes,
That's what you're suggesting.
yes. And so we have them often in their own place and we just cite them. A simple citation.
But they're actually part of the bylaw.
They are zoning. They're in the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, okay.
Are they zoning or subdivision regulations?
Zoning.
Okay, I was confused by that. Is it possible that we could use these to apply to our lowlands or our lake and pond overlay district and some of those areas that are already special areas within the zoning district, or are they somewhat limited in what we can apply these to?
No, you can apply them. You can apply them to what you want to apply them to. You know, they would not go with by right development. You know, if somebody just created a lot along a road, a 2-acre or a 4-acre lot, and wanted to do a lot of damage there, and all they needed was a building permit, I don't think there's any way that you can invoke the rural siting principles on something like that. But something that required site plan review prior to a building permit or a special permit prior to a building permit, you could bring them in at those permitting stages ahead of the building permit.
I could see them being useful in some of the proposals we're looking at this time. Well, not right now, but as we're looking at the proposals and trying to have building maintain the characteristics of our town that seem to be getting overrun by some of what has been permitted. So I think we obviously have to look at these as they would apply to our town, but I think there's something that gives us some basic language to work from, and it's always easier when you're looking at language instead of a blank piece of paper.
Yep. And I know that not following these are often the basis, well, in a town that doesn't have them, not following these principles that you don't have is often what people say in hearings and what board members feel. But without having them in black and white, there's nothing to go to. There's nothing to cite. There's nothing in your regulations that you can point to that is being disrespected or violated. So having them down in black and white gives you a place to go if you're thinking about you know, strongly encouraging a developer to change their plans, because you could very well deny based on them not meeting those principles.
Mhm.
Have there
But
been
not
any
unless
court,
you've written them down.
Right.
have there been any court cases on these rural siting principles so far?
I'm not aware of them, but they are standards that apply to site plan review and special permits and NRPZs and things like that. And it's widely recognized that standards that are enumerated for these types of permits, if they're listed out, if they're in black and white, are enforceable. So whether you call them rural siting standards or development standards or whatever, there's ample material in the case law for supporting that. But I don't know any court cases that specifically involve these rural siting principles. And the object is not to have any court cases. The object is to
Right, no, I know.
to say here we have these things, and you need to respect them. And
Yes. So if these became amendments to the zoning bylaw, and I know we can't figure out right now what's 50% plus one and what is 2/3. So we probably don't know if they would be able to pass with 50% plus one under natural resource preservation zoning, or if we would need 2/3.
2/3,
Okay,
yeah.
it's just, it's very,
The only type of natural resource protection zoning that needs a simple majority, you have to demonstrate. I don't know how, but you'd have to demonstrate that you're not taking away from the overall build out of Stockbridge, and most likely you could not. You could not prove that. I mean, we saw the DeSisto went from 54 down to 38. So the new state law wants the thing to be density neutral, and that's not really how NRPZ is supposed to work. But that would be the only way. If you made it density neutral, and you made a good case that it's density neutral, then under that new law, you could get it passed with a simple majority.
you can tell they were written by bureaucrats and not planners, those amendments. They're confusing.
Well, yeah, it's they're housing measures. They're trying to encourage more housing.
Definitely. There was a comment that Marie did a good job of summarizing the objections to the original DeSisto proposal, but the buildings in back of the mansion that Jeff is saying was a good thing were. So I don't know if we need more clarification on that or not, but the back of the mansion were a good thing, according to one person who's been involved with the process.
Well, there may be some problem with how timeshares work in hotels. There's a lot of transient people in and out.
Sorry, could I just clarify? That was my comment, and you didn't read it correctly. I was just making the point that Jeff seemed to approve of the buildings directly in back of the mansion as looking like a good thing, but he didn't like the houses sprawled out in the back. But those buildings that were on the proposal in back of the mansion, those were all the condo hotels where they're going to have timeshares. And that's what a lot of people objected to in the meeting that you referred to.
Yeah, I liked it. I liked it mostly because it was fairly compact. It was it had a relationship to the main building. And if you look carefully at the design, it was just a nice design. A lot of interior courtyards, pools, vegetation, the cars and the traffic were all, kind of kept on the periphery. So just from a strictly a design standpoint, it looked pretty good. It looked like a nice place to be. And it didn't use up a lot of land from that perspective. But certainly timeshares in hotels are things where people are going to be coming and going. And you have to think of how high or low is the tolerance going to be for that that type of activity. It may be higher in certain areas where there's not a lot of neighbors, and less tolerance in areas where the neighbors are in there pretty tight. I don't know, would that project have worked if most of that in the back was not timeshare and was either ownership or some other form that would be more permanent?
I don't know. I don't know.
More like vacation homes that belong to certain people that could visit at certain times.
I'm not sure what would have gone there.
Yeah.
It ended up just getting such a problem, that that so many people had so many different thoughts and objections. I'm not sure what eventually would have gone there.
I don't think it was so much that, a number of units there, but it was the lighting and the traffic and where were they going to put parking lots? Is it going to be in my backyard? Am I going to see people coming and going at all hours with lights coming and shining into my home? And I think that's the kind of thing people are concerned about.
Yeah, probably.
Well, that's why it's really important to assess these types of uses, and we may want to think about different uses according to where the setting is, where the project is going to be put in. If it's going to have tight neighbors on both sides, then one constellation of uses. Whereas if it's out in the countryside and it's not really closely developed on both sides or anywhere across the street, then you could get a little more liberal, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And that decision, so you could have a wide range of things that could be proposed, but the planning board, through its special permitting process, doesn't have to approve all of them, depending on the setting.
Right.
Jeff, does it make sense that as one of your next steps that you work on the Cottage Era Estate section of this natural resource protection zoning law bylaw?
I'd like to do that. Get it out there a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes that's the only way you're gonna get people to tell you what they don't like about it.
Yeah. The other thing, unless anybody objects, I think that's a good use of Jeff's time. The other thing, it seems to me, as we get further into this, and we've been through the bylaw itself, and we've had a good discussion around Cottage Era Estate. In preparation for, or as part of the process of bringing the public up to speed on these changes, this new bylaw and the change to the Cottage Era Estate bylaw, it seems to me it would be useful to, obviously we're going to need the entire bylaw, that's a given. If we had a kind of a cheat sheet that, that's not the term I would use formally, but you know what I'm getting at, a kind of summary of the key points
Yep.
in words of one syllable, not using a lot of terms of art, um, on the key elements of the bylaw, um, how it would change the way Stockbridge deals with these issues today, why it's an improvement over subdivision development. Um, I just think having a couple of pages of summary, short summary paragraphs, highlighting the key elements and explaining them as beneficial and why would be, I think, really helpful in the process of educating, because we've had handfuls of people in these meetings. I think it's been really good that we've had the participation we've had from outside the planning board, but it's hardly representative of the whole town. And it just seems to me, yes, everybody can go on to CTSB and watch the recordings of these meetings. How many people are going to do that is I would debate, but probably not a huge number would sit through a recording. So I think if we can help people by summarizing the key elements in a separate document at some point, and I'm not suggesting this for the next meeting, sometime, relatively soon, that does what I've just described, summarizes in not at great length, a couple of pages, hopefully, the key elements of the bylaw, why these principal parts of the bylaw are important and why they are beneficial to the town.
Let me,
Seems to me to would be a useful thing to have. I'd welcome comments from
Yeah.
the members of the board who are present.
I can show you an example of that I just did a few weeks ago for another town I'm working in. I could share that on the screen.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. Let's see which one it is. Okay. All right, here we go. Can everybody see it? It says flexible frontage.
Yes.
So I'm working on 3 zoning bylaws for this town. One is called flexible frontage. It's an alternative to conventional A&R development. And there's 2 paragraphs that describe it. And then there's some illustrations that show conventional A&R and then the flexible frontage approach. So that's sort of prose and illustration, 1 page. And then accessory apartments. We talk about accessory apartments in 3 paragraphs here. And then we have a picture of one, a detached one. And then we go down, and this one's what you're doing, natural resource protection zoning. And this is a fairly detailed description of how this all works. That's as a whole page. And then the next page is 2 examples. One conventional, the next one an NRPZ for the same piece of land.
Yeah.
So all 3 bylaws explained in 4 pages.
That's sort of what I was thinking of.
It works for me.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. And in fact,
I might even adapt this one for you guys.
okay, that would be great. It just so happens, by the way, that we're also looking at ADUs. So we'd love to see your ADU one too.
Oh, for accessory apartments?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I like its compactness. I think flexible frontage is probably not so relevant unless somebody. I mean, you could send along all 3, but the 2 that are particularly of interest are the NRPZ, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, just coincidentally, the fact that we're looking at an ADU bylaw.
Okay.
I like that it's called the apartment instead of the accessible, ADU.
Yeah,
I like it. The apartment idea sounds better.
yeah. ADU sounds
Accessory
like,
apartment.
it sounds like a Department of Defense acronym. Atomic Development Unit,
It
you know.
sounds like activities of daily living with
All
Jeff.
right.
Yeah, I approve that.
So Jeff, if you could send that to Christine,
Yep.
that would really be helpful. And if you want to customize the NRPZ section for us, even more helpful.
Sure, you bet.
Jeff, we can include that in the minutes of this meeting for public dissemination on the website, right? As long as we credit your authorship.
Yeah, I have the particular town's name in those documents right now.
Can
And
you redact them or change them or?
I'll get them in. I'll do something about that. I'll make it gender neutral.
Okay,
Definitely politically correct here.
Yeah.
that should work.
Okay. So I think I'm ready to start working on the CEE. Put it as the tail end of the NRPZ, and see if I can get the CEE right, and then get them properly meshed up so they
Okay.
work. Meshed
Good.
up, not messed up.
Meshed up. Yes. MESH.
I will also say that I sent Randall Arendt, the bylaw that I've drafted, the conservation analysis section, and the worksheet on the DeSisto property for him to look at. And
Good.
just during our conversation, just a few days ago, he emailed back and told me how busy he was, but he was going to get to it shortly. So.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other?
So everyone knows, Randall support services to Jeff are part of our contract with the two of them. So we're really lucky to have these two people, plus being able to hear from Joel. It's amazing we have this kind of expertise, I think. So we're in good hands.
We are, yes. Does anybody have anything else or any questions for Jeff or comments about next steps or anything we've talked about today?
Nope, good job.
Again, I'll do the minutes and those will be shared in due course.
Okay.
Jeff,
So-
how much time do you think, because we've been meeting every week, do you think we need to take a week off and give you some time so we're not feeling as rushed? Or how much time do you think you're going to need to put together all of this information and get it to us to review before the next meeting?
Well, I'm working for a number of towns right now, and what focuses me is knowing that I'm going to be here with you guys for a couple of hours in a workshop. And so if there's no workshop coming up, then what I do is I go work for other towns and procrastinate until the next workshop is upon me. So the faster you want to go, the more work you want out of me, the more frequently you'll schedule these things, because I don't want to embarrass myself by not having anything done for you. So I'm going to show up with work done if you schedule these.
I guess, Christine, the obvious question is, would you have a draft of the Cottage Era Estate section by next week? If we, if we did another Thursday meeting, let's say, could you have it for us by Tuesday?
I could take what Joel did. I'll sort of blend that with what you've got now and some of my thinking. And what I can go through is go through and make a bunch of edits, and then also put a lot of questions in, a lot of comments that are questions for you guys.
Okay,
You know, asking, do you want this provision, or
right,
Uh,
right,
you
as you've
really
done
want-
before, right.
you really want to allow this and that? So I could have something that's, you know, that's launched, that's underway, but still has a lot of questions, and we can go through some of those questions, and you guys can make some decisions that will get me into the next week
Okay.
of doing this.
Christine, does that make sense to you?
Sure. So we're going to get the questions this week and we'll have a meeting the following week, or are we going to have the questions by Tuesday so we can meet on Thursday?
If you mean Thursday the 11th,
Yes,
Thursday the 11th would be good for me. 4 o'clock.
Yes, that's, yes, I guess so.
Okay.
What about Nancy and Marie? Can you do next Thursday?
Yeah, my appointments are earlier in the day.
Marie?
I can do it. Is this hard for Gary?
well, you heard that he's,
Have to do it.
we kind of have to ignore Gary, which
I can do it.
suboptimal, but he's told us that, so
Okay.
I'm not sure about Kate, but
Well, we don't have a planning board meeting, so maybe she can come.
yeah, so 4 o'clock next Thursday. And if at all possible, Jeff, if you could have that draft of the Cottage Air Estate stuff with all your questions and comments and question marks by Tuesday,
Yeah.
that would really be helpful.
All right. Let me see what I can do on
Okay.
that. Yeah,
As soon
good.
as I get them from you, I will ask Jennifer to post them on the town website so that people who are participating in the meeting, who are not planning board members, will also be able to see what we're discussing. Does
Yeah.
that make sense, everybody?
It does. Very good.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
One thing I got to tell you guys is that the fourth week of March, from the 23rd until the 26th, sometime on the 26th, I'm going to be away. So I can't do any meetings on 23rd, 24th, 25th, or probably the 26th.
Well, there's no planning board meeting that week. No regularly scheduled 6:30 on Tuesday meeting that week. So that's good. We can live with that.
Okay. All right. Well,
Good. Anybody else? Hearing nothing from anybody. Jeff, thank you again. Thank you all for the rest of you for participating. Thanks for the good comments and questions. We're plowing ahead, making progress. I appreciate the involvement of all of you.
Well, thank
okay.
you guys for doing Christine and Bill for doing all the work.
Well, it's Christine. Christine gets the credit.
Christine, you get the credit.
Absolutely.
Gold star.
I'm trying to keep all the balls in the air, but boy, I'm sorry if I mess up, but
Oh, you're not. You're doing great.
You're not. You've done yeoman's work or yo woman's work.
Yo, woman.
Yo.
Oh, woman.
Yo.
Yeah.
Yo,
So-
woman.
Can I declare this meeting adjourned?
So
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see
Oh,
you
yeah,
next week.
thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good night.
Good
Okay,
night.
bye.